It's time to begin. We're certainly grateful for the opportunity to study this morning, study together. Always a joy for me. It's a joy for me to be able to study to try to teach, and I always feel like I'm better for it. Maybe it doesn't show, but I feel that way at least. And we're grateful to have all of you. We've got Caleb Johnson with us, Laura and James Border. Laura is Lee's youngest sister. Say I was good. I didn't say baby. But we're glad to have them with us, and I'm sorry Lee's not feeling well this morning, but hopefully she can be with us maybe tonight. We are studying in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7, and also Luke's account in Luke 6. We haven't referred to that as much, but we did read it in one of our earlier classes concerning the Sermon on the Mount, Luke's account of the same. But before we do, in our Bible daily readings, we have come down to the 17th would have been Thursday. The 17th, 18th, and then yesterday the 19th, not including tonight, would be Acts 11 through 17. Acts 11 through 17. Okay, in Acts 10, we have the conversion of who? Cornelius. And 11, it follows on the heels. Peter does what? Explains his actions back in Jerusalem over that. And then also in chapter 11, we have a little bit on the church at what city? Antioch of Syria, which would be the sending church on all three of Paul's journeys. And we have Barnabas going to Tarsus, seeking Saul, finds him, brings him back to Antioch, and they taught much people. And then the problem with there is a need due to a famine in 27 through 30. All right, in 12, in essence, we have the death of whom? James, a brother of John. And then Peter is in prison. Then we have the death of a political leader, Herod Agrippa I. And then in 13 and 14, Paul's what? Paul's first journey. And we have Paul. There are three who leave. Paul, Barnabas, and John Mark. And then John Mark leaves them after Perga and then goes back, and then they continue on. I like to try to summarize, and if you just think that the main cities, though they went from Antioch to Salamis, or to the Isle of Cyprus, and Salamis, and Paphos, and then Perga, and Antioch, Iconium, Lystra, Derbe, then they retraced it. If you think that the primary work was done in southern Galatia, and the four cities of Antioch, Iconium, Lystra, and Derbe, those will be significant later in the second and third journeys, as well as the letter to the southern Galatia. I told you, the letter to the Galatians. Okay, so that's in 13 and 14. And then when they come back, they're appointing what in every city? Elders in every city. Then in 15, there's a problem. There are Judaizing teachers who are saying that Gentiles have to do what? Be circumcised as well as keep the law of Moses. So Paul, there's a parallel passage to Acts 15, and that's in Galatians 2. And so Paul takes Barnabas and Titus and certain others from Antioch. It says up to, but it's down on the mount, from Antioch southward down to, or up to Jerusalem. And then they have really three meetings. There's the meeting between the apostles and elders. Then there's a meeting of the whole church. And then they end up writing a letter, basically, that the Gentiles Gentile men do not have to be circumcised. They just need to keep themselves from blood, from things sacrificed to idols, fornication. And if they do that, everything's okay. 1536 is a passage you want to keep in mind, because that's the beginning of journey number 2, and that goes through 1822. So in chapter 1536, we find Paul, and now on this occasion, Paul and who? Silas leave. And John Mark, Barnabas might have gone with them, but there was a what? A split, a problem overtaking John Mark. And so there was no small dissension. There's a large disagreement on that. And so really, though, it worked out well for both parties, because Paul chose Silas and went northward through Syria and Cilicia. And then Barnabas took John Mark and went over to the Isle of Cyprus. And so they doubled their efforts, actually. And then in 16, we find them going down to Lystra, Derbe. They found a young man whose name was Timothy. And Timothy is going to be Paul's right-hand man, really, for the rest of his life. And he's there's just nothing really ever said insofar as a blemish in any style of Timothy. He's just a sterling young man and a companion to Paul. Says it can't be done, doesn't it? All right, so there's Timothy. And then in Acts 16, then he goes on from Lystra, Derbe, straight course to Samothracia, and then Amphipolis, Apollonia. Well, I'm sorry, I was getting 17. And eventually comes to Philippi. And the two conversions at Philippi are the Lydia and her house, and then the jailer and his house. Good. In the last chapter, in 17, they leave Philippi after they had been wrongly beaten, incarcerated, and then they go to, they make a straight course, Amphipolis, Apollonia, then they come to Thessalonica. And so he reasons in the synagogue, and we have the church planted in Thessalonica. Jews stir up problems, so they go down to, starts with a B, Berea. And then Jews stirred up a problem, and then they go down to Athens. And it's not as evident here, but Paul is leaving behind people. Luke at Philippi, and Silas back in Thessalonica. And so then eventually they'll catch up with him. But so we have the work at Thessalonica, Berea, and then the speech on Mars Hill at the city of Athens. And then there are a few conversions, but not much at Athens. All right, so that leads us to where we finished in our reading yesterday. Hope it's helpful. All right, let's turn back to Matthew 5 now. Matthew 5. And in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus has been preaching, as we've been noticing, the what of heaven. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. Yes, the same thing John preached. And Matthew emphasizes the kingdom of heaven. That's all of that. And so when we go back to the main ideas, we've got the years of preparation, Luke 1, 2, 3, Matthew 1, 2, early part of 3, Mark 1, John 1. John 1 predates everything, because John 1 starts in the beginning. That way on the timeline for you. In the beginning was the Word. So he antedates all of that. But then, then the years of preparation ended about 30 years with Jesus' what? Baptism. And so we have the beginning ministry, primarily down here in the area of Judea. John 1, John's disciples start coming to Jesus. John 2, a quick trip to Canaan, turns water to wine. Then quick trip to Capernaum, back to Jerusalem, where he cleanses the temple. John 3, Nicodemus. John 4, the woman, as he comes up here, the woman at the well. And then John 4, still, he goes to Canaan, heals the nobleman's son in Capernaum, goes to Nazareth, and what do they want to do? Kill him there. And then he goes to Capernaum, and then we have, that's his home, his headquarters. And so then after that, there's healings, teachings in the synagogue, healing of different kinds of healings, the leper, the paralytic. He's calling Matthew or Levi, who is what was his occupation? Tax collector. And then he defends his disciples for feasting rather than fasting. He comes back to Jerusalem at some point for the feast in John 5 and heals a lame man. The problem was, not a problem for Jesus, but according to the Pharisees, the problem was he healed him on the Sabbath day. And so these alleged Sabbath violations are a huge part of it. Then he heals a man with a withered hand on the Sabbath. And they wanted to kill him then. And he makes an argument they just could not refute. He withdraws from his enemies. Then after a night of prayer, he selects the 12. And we pointed out that the Beatitudes deal with qualities of character. Let's name them, we'll go through quick. We're going slow enough where everybody can just about memorize this without looking. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those that mourn over their sins, they're sorry. Those who are meek, those who hunger and thirst after righteousness, those who are merciful, they've had mercy extended to them. Those who are pure in heart, and those who are peacemakers. And then this is the attitude we ought to have toward everybody. You think, well, everybody ought to appreciate that, but they don't. We have to take it on the chin and be willing to. Blessed are they that are persecuted for righteousness' sake. And then, is it on, Jonathan? Jonathan? Okay. I saw Jonathan, I thought something was wrong. So then he says, but the only really light that the world can have is you, and so you be the salt of the earth and the light of the world. Well, whereas these Pharisees have been thinking that Jesus is violating the Sabbath law and all that, he says, don't think I came to destroy the law or the prophets. I came not to destroy, but to fulfill. And he says, I've got ultimate respect for it. In fact, ultimate respect in the fact that I am deity to the degree that I tell you, verily I say unto you, there's not one jot or one tittle that shall in any wise pass away from the law till all things be accomplished or fulfilled. Then, what our attitude should be, whosoever shall break one of these least commandments and teach men so, the same shall be called least in the kingdom. Whosoever shall do and teach them, he'll be called the greatest. And that just means we're either in it, we're great, or we're out of it, we're least. Not that we're still in it, but we're out of it. We looked at that. In 21 through 26, tell me what it's about. You've heard that it was said to them of old, thou shalt not murder or kill. But I say, don't be angry with your brother. Don't call him Raka, or says to him Raka, and don't say, you fool. You've been guilty of hell. And so the point is, what starts with what anticipates and leads to murder is actually know what in your heart for the brother. No, from a negative point of view. Luke's account. You don't do what? The four-letter word starts with an L. You don't love your brother. Yes. And here's the point we made on Luke's account. He starts, but I say unto you which hear, love your enemies. Do good to them that hate you. Bless them that curse you. Pray for them that spitefully use you. If he smites you on one cheek, offer the other also. If he takes away your cloak, you don't respond in time. You don't retaliate. Give to everyone that asks you, and him that takes away your good, ask them not again. You love them that love you. All of these are similar to what we had in Matthew 5:21 through 28. Then at the end of Luke's account of the same, but love your enemies. Same thing that he starts with up here. Love your enemies. Do them good. Lend never despairing. For he's kind toward the unthankful and evil. Be ye merciful, even as your Father is merciful, which in 48 he said also, ye therefore shall be perfect, full grown, mature, in the sense that we love even those who are unlovable. And so that's really, I think, a real key to seeing what we find in here in the Sermon on the Mount. That rather than allow hate to go into brawling, into murder, or even just in studying, looking to lust. And Jesus does not mention the word lasciviousness, but other passages do. And it's the next step past lust, which ends in fornication. Very much like the banquetings lead to revelings, which lead to drunkenness. And Jesus deals with all of these ideas that anticipate the sin itself. All right, we talked about that. I want to fast forward. Come back here. So we have the Beatitudes, concern about our influence, his relation to the law as well as what ours should be. And then don't be angry. Reconcile your wrongs immediately. He says, if you're offering your gift at the altar and there rememberest thou that your brother has ought or something against you, leave your gift at the altar, go be what? Reconciled to your brother. So there again, the whole issue is I don't want to do anything that causes a problem in my relation with God, and I don't want to cause a relation problem with somebody else. I'm trying to love God and love one another, and that's so reconciled. Then where we were Wednesday night, you've heard that it was said to them, "Thou shalt not commit adultery." Let's just kind of talk through it again together. You've heard that it was said, "Thou shalt not commit adultery." Fill in the blanks. "But I say unto you, whoever looks on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery already in his heart." And then he says, but if what? If your right eye offends you, pluck it out, because it's better for you to enter into life's main than in the whole body be cast into hell. So your right eye. And if your right hand offend you, cut it off, sever it. For it's better for you to enter into life's main, same language, than to what? The whole body be cast into hell. All right. So then the next verse moves to what? What is it? Divorce. That's right. And so we talked about this. How you've heard it said, "Thou shalt not commit adultery." I say, don't look at a woman to lust after her. And I think the connection, how it can lead to adultery as well as divorce. We talked about this. We'll not go over that. We mentioned this Wednesday night. Lust is not the momentary passing thought, otherwise there's no distinction between temptation and sin, but it's the looking to lust. And that little Greek epi is a prefix that intensifies thumeo, but that, I mentioned this Wednesday night, that comes from a Greek word thermos. It's like THUMMOS. Think thermos. What does a thermos hold in? Heat. It's like thermal. It holds it in. And so this epi emphasizes, and so the passion, it's not just an occasional look to lust, but it's to set one's heart upon, to have a desire, to long for, turning one's mind to the person, continually longing for it. Brother Earnhardt mentioned, well, I missed a mistake there. I should have had an in quotation mark there. But Brother Earnhardt mentioned it's the calculated cultivation of the desire to possess one to whom we have no right. The calculated cultivation of the desire. A person focuses on it, and he just doesn't let up. It's not like, hey, I see that, I got to go on to something else. He just dwells on it, fantasizes on it is the idea. So if we're to escape that, the first approach has to be, it's got to be turned off. It's got to be rejected or fled from. And I mentioned Wednesday night, our culture not only does not help in the matter, but it actively harms in promoting it through pornography, which really feeds all this. And tight, sheer, revealing clothing, lecherous poses. I was thinking early this morning when I was reviewing notes on all this. When I lived in Athens, went to Jackson Drive. This was in 81, 82, 83. There was a lady there who was a wife of one of the elders, Pauline Lovell, Billy Lovell's wife. And she was a great lady. But she had classes with young ladies, and there were a bunch of young ladies in the church there then. And some of them would tell me, what she would talk about. And I remember, how you sit, how you stand. If you stretch up for something, you're wearing a dress, just all of the details about how you need to be careful as a lady, as a young lady, as you grow into adult, that you don't put yourself in such a way that could cause a guy, should I say it, girls too now, to lust, to want someone sexually. And I guess I didn't appreciate what I not that I was against it. I thought that's fine. I just thought, you go with. but I guess I didn't appreciate it as much enough then as I think I would now. If she were still alive, I'd tell her I appreciate it. But all of this stuff here, we live in a licentious world. And as I mentioned before, these are passages that teach, we've already got desires, sexual desires. What you got to do is you put a cap on it, stop it. And all of this is reserved for what? What's the sexual relations reserved for? Marriage. And I mentioned Wednesday night, associated with lust is the word lasciviousness, which is the next step before adultery. And wanton manners, filthy words, indecent bodily movements, unchaste handling of males and females. Obviously, this is fed by lust, and it ends in adultery, and we have the same chart there that we had a little bit earlier. Only radical surgery can remedy the problem, remove the right eye or the right hand. Not physically, not a literal interpretation, but whatever we look at that can cause us to stumble, whatever we do with our hands. And as Matthew 18 discusses, even our feet. If our feet causes us to stumble, cut them off. That doesn't mean that's going to keep you from sinning, but a place that you go, something you do, something you see. These are all matters that we have to kill, to mortify. And cast it from thee indicates the separation is decisive, it's determined, it's absolute, it's not gradual. This is a new chart, actually. This part I had on Wednesday night. Notice the use of the right eye, the right hand, and how both or all three, the hand, foot, and eye, are all three used as occasions of stumbling. The King James for the word stumble is what? Starts with an O. Richard, you remember offhand? It's in the King James of the Sermon on the Mount. If your right eye causes you to be offended. And that doesn't mean, we usually have a limited use of the word offend for that. I just don't like something. But it actually comes from a Greek word, scandalizo, from which we get our English word guess. Scandal, a scandal. And it began, it actually began as like a trap, a snare. That's how the word originally was framed. It's a snare or a trap. And then as someone would come into the trap or an animal, it would cause the animal or the person to actually stumble. And so the snare or the trap, which was behind the word, caused the person to stumble, then hence it just took on the meaning to stumble or to sin. An enticement to sin. And I wanted to come to this. I didn't make this point really Wednesday night. This is the new part of this chart. If your eye or your hand causes you to stumble or to offend you, to put a stumbling block, then cut it off, amputate it, get rid of it. Let's look at these passages here. 1 Corinthians 8 and Romans 14. The reason I want to go to this is because we live in a culture that is completely selfish on matters like this, from this point of view. Let's go to Romans 14 first. Who are you to tell me what I can do with my body? Who are you to tell me what I can and can't do? Who's going to do this? I'll do what I want to do. Well, what if what you do or you want to do causes another person to stumble? Sin. Then you're responsible. In Romans 14, the main point or points of Romans 14 deal with the esteeming of certain days and the eating or not eating of various meats. Think real quickly. For the Jews, the dietary regulations would have forbidden pork, certain fish, and whatnot. Here's a Gentile that didn't have that problem. He could eat anything, eat any kind of fish, catfish or whatever. Here is a Gentile who has been used to going to various temples, and then after he gets through with his worship to the various god, he comes and he takes a piece of meat that had been sold in the meat market there by the temple, and he eats it in honor to the idol god he just worshipped. All right? The Jew says, there's nothing in these idol gods. There's no God but one. And so, you shouldn't be bothered about it. And he thinks, if I eat this meat, I may be sharing in fellowship with this idol god I used to worship. So I'm just going to refrain from all meats. You see how the problem was? So Paul answers all of that in chapter 14. And he basically says, on these matters of conscience, which are either way you go are fine with God. That's the point. If you eat meat, that's fine. If you don't eat meat, that's fine. If you esteem a certain day as particularly special, that's fine. And if you don't, that's fine. They're we would say divine liberties. But there's a principle there. If you'll notice in verse 15, if because of meat thy brother is grieved, thou walkest no longer in what? Love. Destroy not with thy meat him for whom Christ died. You don't want to do anything that will cause a person to be repulsed or repelled from God. You want to bring them to God. Then go on down in verse 19. So then let us follow after things which make for peace, and things whereby we may edify one another. Overthrow not for meat's sake the work of God. All things indeed are clean. Howbeit it is evil for that man who eats with offense. Offense. What do your translations have? End of verse 20. They eat with what? Offense. Yeah. It's a different Greek word from scandalon, but it means the same in the context. It's like you're beating up on somebody who, who has a conscience about this. Now, 21. It is good not to eat flesh, nor to drink wine, nor to do anything whereby thy brother stumbles. The faith which you have, hast not to yourself before God. Happy is he that judge not himself in that which he approves. That is, he allows himself to do certain things that could cause another to stumble. So, not only should you have respect for your own conscience, you need to have respect for another person's conscience. One other passage, 1 Corinthians 8. Paul dealt it in a similar vein, not the same, but is similar in 8, 9, and 10 of 1 Corinthians. In fact, in 8:1, concerning things sacrificed to idols. Yeah, we know that an idol is nothing, but not everybody has that same knowledge. So in chapter 8, he's primarily dealing with people who are brethren. They have obeyed the gospel, but they came out of a pagan environment. And so he says, verse 9, take heed lest by any means this liberty of yours become a stumbling block to the weak. So here's the eating of meats that had been a part of a pagan sacrifice. Verse 11, for through thy knowledge he that is weak perishes. The brother, you're talking about brethren here, the brother for whose sake Christ died. And thus sinning against the brethren, wounding their conscience. When it's weak, you sin against Christ. Wherefore, if meat causes my brother to stumble, what? I won't eat flesh forevermore that causes not my brother to stumble. So here's the point that I really wanted to emphasize, that I believe Jesus emphasizes back in the Sermon on the Mount. He spends at least 2 verses on it. He says, if your right eye causes you to stumble, pluck it out. If your right hand causes you to stumble, you're doing something, looking at something that causes you to do what is wrong, then sever whatever that is. Cut it out, pluck it out. And then these other passages talk about you don't cause anybody else by your actions or what you do, what you say, to stumble. Those passages teach that. All right, and let's move on. Jesus here emphasizes the earnestness with which men should seek a sinless life. This does not nullify grace, obviously. Where sin has gone must go his grace. The gospel is for all, yeah. But it's what we're striving for. That's the ideal. So since the right eye, the right hand, the foot are most precious, Jesus says it's better to lose what is dearest in this physical life if it causes us to sin than to lose our souls in hell. That's the significance of it. We did talk a little bit, we did read Wednesday night, Deuteronomy 24. Jesus still discusses in principle love, begun back in verse 27, when he says in 31, and you've heard it said, thou shalt what? You've heard it said, if you divorce your wife, give her a what? A certificate or a bill of divorce, and put her away. But I say unto you, what? Everyone who puts away his wife, except for sexual immorality or fornication, causes her to commit adultery. And whosoever marries her that is put away commits adultery. All right, several things on this. Jesus quoted here the bill of divorce. Let's go back. I know we read this, but we have so many people not with us who are not with us Wednesday night. Go back to Deuteronomy 24. Deuteronomy 24. Some of us call this contingency legislation. The Bible doesn't call it that, but if this sometimes happens, then this is what consequences ought to be. When a man takes a wife and marries her, then it shall be, if she find no favor in his eyes, because he hath found some unseemly or unclean thing in her, whatever it was, and I've got a chart on this, whatever it was, I don't think it was adultery, because Leviticus 20 verse 10 says if a woman commits adultery, she's to be what? She's be put to death, the man as well. But here's some unseemly thing that he write her a bill of divorcement, give it into her hand, it's a public thing, and send her out of his house. And when she's departed out of his house, she may go and be another man's wife. And if the latter husband hate her and write her a bill of divorcement, give it into her hand, send her out of his house, or the latter husband die, who took her to be his wife, she can't go back and do what? She can't go back to her first husband. And so, in essence, the law did not say, hey, it's a real good thing for you to divorce, and here's the legislation, and here's the mechanical procedure to go about. He didn't say that. He said, if you find something there, and he's wanting to divorce, then these are stipulations. It's going to have to be a public matter. It's going to have to be in writing. It's going to have to be given to her in a public way, and she can go ahead and be somebody else's wife. But I want you to know, if you do that, she'll never be yours again. And so, I believe, guys, that that the Pharisees, especially in their question to Jesus in chapter 19, indicate that they were a whole lot less concerned over reasons for divorce and the consequences that they brought on the victims of divorce than on the moral principles that were involved, that Jesus said were really from the beginning. They looked at it as a command rather than allowance. And by that, they missed the very purpose. Let's go to Matthew 19. We'll tie all this together, I think, in just a moment. Hopefully we can. Matthew 19. The paragraph begins in verse 3. The Pharisees come to Jesus and say, what's their first question? That's right. Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? And in essence, Jesus said yes or no. What's the quick answer?
No.
No. The quick answer is no. And look how he couched it. He answered and said, have you not read that he who made them from the beginning made them male and female? That goes all the way back to Genesis 1. And then in Genesis 2, he quotes from that in verse 5. And he said, for this cause shall a man leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So here's Jesus' conclusion to the answer to the question. So that they are no more two but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. That's the end of the answer to the first question. So that just keep this in mind. When they said, can a man divorce his wife for every cause? Jesus said basically, no. And he referred them to God's original will. All right, look at verse 7. They have a follow-up. They say unto him, why then did Moses command to give a bill of divorcement and to put her away? As if the Lord wanted that to happen. And so he corrected their mistaken thinking. He said, Moses, for your hardness of heart, what's the next word? Permitted or suffered, allowed is the idea. He allowed you to do this. An allowance, a permission, is not necessarily what the real will is of anybody. For that, I permit somebody to do that. I don't mean I really like it, but there's a permission. So Moses, for your hardness of heart, suffered you to put away your wives. But from the beginning, what? It was not so. It was not God's will from the beginning. And I say unto you, whosoever shall put away his wife, except for fornication, and shall marry another, commits adultery, and he that marries her when she's put away commits adultery. Well, they got the point, because they say, if the case is so with the man, if the case of the man is so with his wife, it's what? It's better not to marry. In other words, if these are the kinds of restrictions, the strictures that are going to be placed around if you can divorce or not, better not get into that. Well, Jesus said, he didn't back off. He said, well, you misunderstood. He didn't say that. Look at verse 11. He said, not all men can receive this saying, but they to whom it's given. Well, who are those to whom it's given? Look at the next verse. They're eunuchs that were so born from their mother's womb. We'd say those would be congenital eunuchs. And there are eunuchs that were made eunuchs by men, surgical eunuchs, like Daniel and his friends. And then there are eunuchs that have made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake. That would be more like spiritual eunuchs. And then he concludes by saying, he that is able to receive it, let him receive it. So basically, when he mentions all this stuff about eunuchs, he's saying what I'm saying applies to everybody except people who don't what? He mentions that, well, there are certain eunuchs, they don't desire to do what? To marry. And so he says, this applies to everybody except those who don't marry. In other words, yeah, it has universal application. And he gives those exceptions to the rule. Okay, let's move on here. I did a question. I'm doing all the talking, almost. Anybody? David, looked like you wanted to say something. Anybody? Okay, so the idea is that these Pharisees looked at Matthew 5 in the giving of a bill of divorcement to put her away as like something that's good rather than a divine allowance. And by so doing, they missed the purpose of the law on that matter. The purpose of the law was not to encourage divorce, but actually put what? Draw in the reins, put the brakes on it. Make a person think, if I divorce my wife, oh, we were so good. Can't you just flesh this out? Oh, we were so close, and she just got to the point where I just can't stand. And divorce her, and she could never do what? Come back. Am I sure I never want to see that woman again? Am I sure I never want to have her? Well, it puts the restraints on an already existing practice. God's attitude toward divorce is that he does what? The four-letter word. He hates it. Nice 5 letters, isn't it? He hates it. And consistent with this was the contingency that the law put on divorce, which was a type of a moral break on rampant divorce and due to the hardness of their heart. That was Jesus' comment on Deuteronomy 24. He said, Moses, because of the hardness of your heart, suffered or permitted allowed it. But from the beginning, it was not God's will. So God allowed certain things under the law that were not what he really wanted. The law restrained in this matter by giving certain causes, requiring a legal certificate, and then the prohibition of the husband remarrying the divorced wife. Jesus' response is that marriage is for life unless adultery occurs. One who divorces his faithful wife. We go back to Luke 6. What is the attitude Jesus is driving at? The four-letter word. Love. That keeps you from killing and being angry with, reconciling. It adds to that. Love. And so Jesus answered, well, let me come back up here. One who divorces his faithful wife acts without love and shares in her adultery, because the remarriage is assumed. And whosoever shall put away his wife except it be for fornication causes her to what? Commit adultery. We'll look at that in just a moment. So the only exception is for fornication, which precludes the husband making her what she's already become. He doesn't make her an adulterer, she's already become that. And that's why he can divorce her for that reason. And Jesus answered, basically pre or antedated the law, and it reflected God's will that was from the beginning. But from the beginning it was not so, Jesus said. Moses' law permitted a divorced woman to remarry. Kingdom law does not. Here's a difference between what Jesus taught and what the law taught. This is I took a picture of an old King James Bible that I have that I wanted to emphasize something. If you go back in this section, it kind of came to mind to me that Jesus is still in the backdrop. He has love for your fellow traveler to eternity. Don't offend yourself. Don't cause yourself to stumble. And then be concerned about what is happening to the other party. Look, and so what I've got up here is emphasis on doing anything that would cause oneself or anyone else to stumble or sin is seen in these ideas. Wanting to divorce for any cause puts the one who is divorced, the put away person, in an anticipated future sinful position. She has no right to remarry, hence if and when she does, she and the person remarried commits adultery. All right, here's our verse again. It's been said, whoever puts away his wife, let him give her writing in court. But I say, whoever puts away his wife except for the cause of fornication causes her to commit adultery. He kind of removes himself from what he does to you if you put away your wife for an unscriptural cause. He shifts it to what are the results on the one you have unjustly put away. And it causes her to commit adultery. And then whosoever shall marry her that is divorced, that's the one you've unjustly put away, they commit adultery. So the idea is, I just don't like my wife anymore. We had a good time, but I'm interested in this girl over here half my age, and she works with me at the office, and she really comes on to me, and so there's no reason I should divorce over here. But he does anyway. And then he remarries this other girl. What that does is it puts that first wife, who was not guilty of anything unscriptural, it puts her in a position where she wants to be taken care of. She wants to remarry, but if she does, what happens? She commits adultery. And what happens to the person who remarries her? He commits adultery. And so Jesus, in the bigger picture, is emphasizing, you don't do something that shows obviously absence of love, and in this sense it causes a person to end up in adultery. That's all right. If your right eye offends you, if my right eye offends me, I've got to be concerned about number one. And then what about anyone else? So the idea on both of it is, we are concerned about stumbling. Okay, he goes back to what we said a while ago. Looking to lust has to be killed in one's heart, and if not, It can lead to one's unlawful desire. I think what I did on this chart, let me just say this real quickly. What I did was to try to put everything in a motion here. What was the Lord's intent? I think it's this. If you look to lust, that has to be killed, because if you don't, it can lead to your unlawful desire for another woman, another person's wife. Then, if you end up, because you want that other woman, you don't want your wife, you divorce your faithful wife in order to marry another. It puts the first wife, the wife who was unlawfully divorced, in an anticipated sinful relation due to her subsequent remarriage. Causes her to commit. You can't really cause a person to commit adultery, except in the sense that it puts her in a position that if she does have any relations, any subsequent remarriage, it's what? It's adultery. It also causes anyone who marries her to commit adultery. While there's no practical difference in the outcome of the actions between the teaching of Matthew 5:31 to 32 and 19:9, I believe the emphasis is different. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus emphasizes the far-reaching actions committed to others. Matthew 19:9 emphasizes the actions committed on oneself. And here's where I'm going with that. Here in Matthew 5:32, he causes her to commit adultery. And then in Matthew 19, whosoever shall put away his wife except for fornication and marriage, he, the one who does the putting away, he commits adultery. So, from a practical point of view, is the teaching the same? Yes. The emphasis in Matthew 5 is on what you're doing to this other party. Matthew 9 is what you're doing to yourself. Though, really, in all of that, it means one and the same. The exception is you can divorce if the mate has been what? Guilty of adultery or fornication, right? We're saving for the cause of fornication. And in Matthew 19, except it be for fornication. We're going to have to stop, guys. It's past time. I've got a couple more things. Anybody have a quick comment you want to make, though? I've done most of the talking. Anybody?
Thank you, Philip. I just think it's interesting, and I thought about this for years, literally, contrasting Deuteronomy, the idea of giving a written divorcement, and reconciliation in that case is an abomination, where we would say now that a person can be reconciled to their...
It would be good.
Yeah. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that or whatever.
Yeah, I believe that. I believe that. It was unlawful for them to be reconciled. It would defile the land, all that entailed. But here, in fact, in 1 Corinthians 7, let her be reconciled, let her remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband.
So it went from it being an abomination to...
It's right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Good point.